Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we get you set for a Western Conference showdown in Houston against the Rockets, and to take a look at the larger picture, what has stood out about the new look Bucks? Camille and I share our thoughts coming up after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis, as we thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for checking out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. If you have not signed up yet, still time to do so for free at lockedondaily.com and get your day started with the all-new free Locked On Bucks newsletter. A big one tonight in Houston against a relatively big one against the Houston Rockets. Camille, it's a Rockets team that is in a similar spot to the Bucks. I think they're fifth now in the Western Conference. The first time these two teams played was a throwback game to 101-100, I think it was. Mm-hmm. A defensive grinded out win for the Bucks, kind of leading into their run to the NBA Cup championship. And I think Houston has changed somewhat. We've seen much more growth in play from Amen Thompson, but the Bucks have certainly changed quite a bit since that last matchup, much more than the Rockets have.
They truly have. And we've talked a lot about the Bucks being a surprisingly good defensive team throughout the year. And it seems like with the new additions on this team, the defense has continued to tick up for the Bucks. One thing that highlighted after the last game against the Heat was just looking at the very small sample size of games post All-Star break and seeing the numbers defensively, where it's like the defense has rebounded a bit because going into the break, we know those defensive numbers were pretty poor for this Bucks team. They've rebounded and they've been doing something that we haven't seen them do consistently. I don't want to say ever, but like in years, like just a team that's forcing more turnovers defensively. And that's what this team has been doing. I think that the versatility of being able to have a Kyle Kuzma, a 6'9", 6'10" forward, and throwing him out there with the way that he has been playing has been a game changer for them, in addition to having, Kevin Porter Jr. coming off the bench and just really finding that right rotation. And honestly, of course, having Giannis healthy and in the game also makes a huge difference to this Bucks defense.
So a couple of things that have stood out to me about this group, not just out of the All-Star break, but it's easy to look at those games, and especially that game against the Timberwolves. I know there was no Giannis or Dame, but let's lump that in too with the way that this team has been able to play a little bit differently since around the time of the trade deadline. If we look at cleaning the glasses rankings, the Bucks are currently, for the entire season, 13th in defense and 11th in offense. So a garbage time has really hurt the Bucks offensively, or their play in the garbage time is kind of hurt them offensively. Because when you look at NBA.com's rankings, they're 14th in offense and 11th in defense. But I think one of the big things that stands out, I was hoping it would tell a much clearer picture, and granted, it's not a ton that we've seen it. The minutes with Giannis and Kyle Kuzma, we've heard Doc Rivers talk at length about the thought behind this trade, the length that it gives you, the size in your front court with Kyle Kuzma, his ability to play in transition as well. We haven't seen a ton of Kuz and Giannis lineups together. They've just been okay offensively and defensively in those lineups. But to me, number one, you need a larger sample size. And I'm sure that both of those numbers are going to start to tick upward. But to me, the bigger thing is everything we've seen around those guys. And everybody's favorite player, a guy that you and I have defended quite a bit through the years, Brook Lopez. That is what stands out the most to me, because I think we were all cognizant it was an older team that played at a slower pace. But I don't think you realize those things. It's one of those things where you don't fully realize what's happening around you while you're in it until you can remove yourself and take a look back. And to see this team now where you swap out players like a Chris Middleton, and I don't mean this as a shot against Bobby Portis too. You're playing without Bobby Portis for the time being, and you have injected a lot of youthful athleticism around these guys that, for the most part, look, Dame, I wouldn't call unathletic. He plays at a slower pace. You got one guy that's really like going to bog things down in Brook Lopez. And I think it's been very beneficial to him to have that youth and athleticism around him. And when you look at the lineups on the floor, I talked about it quite a bit at the beginning of the year. What was the biggest thing that stood out about the defense and their growth? Limit your liabilities. This day and age, you can't have multiple guys that people are going to target or are going to say, we can beat him on the perimeter. We can get around the corner on him. You're going to be in trouble if that happens. The same applies to who plays slower in this type of play style, because for the Bucks, it's been one guy, and you've sprinkled in young guys around him that can pick up the pace, can get down the floor. As Doc had said too, we got guys now that can crash for offensive boards and still get back defensively. That, to me, that is what has stood out the most. And granted, it's going to change somewhat in 22 games from now when Bobby Portis returns, but it's still not to the levels of what we were looking at before. And especially late last year too, when you would look at the roster and say defensive liability or play slower, defensive liability or play slower, just one by one, that's largely been removed.
It has. And the cool part about that to me is when Doc came to Milwaukee, the thing that he liked about this team and one thing he wanted to lean into was, hey, we're going to be a bigger, more physical team because we're slow. We're a bit more unathletic. We have to lean on physicality and our size. And with this trade deadline, they were able to get size still and be a bigger physical team, but also add athleticism alongside with that. So not only can the Bucks throw out some really big jumbo defensive lineups, they can also move better than what they did before. And it makes me think a little bit, as weird as this might sound, about the Lakers, because a question that I had with the Lakers after the trade deadline was like, hey, what's the defense going to look like for this team? And I realized with Luka being their starting lineup, with LeBron and Reeves and everybody who they have, they're just a bigger team. So it was like, can their length and size help them because they don't have the rim protector behind them? And I flipped that and think about Milwaukee, and like, if Milwaukee can put out a lot of size plus have somebody like Brook Lopez behind them or Giannis being that help side defender, this defense could be even better than what we were seeing earlier on in the year because of just the various different ways that they can go out there and attack opposing offenses. And that's kind of exciting to look at and think about, like, okay, what lineups can they throw out there? Because to your point about last year, they weren't a team where you had many options. And this year you have more options to utilize. So like, let's see what some of those options look like. And that's the part that's exciting about the last part of the season, in addition to the comp level that they're going to have to be competing against along the way.
Yeah, it's just, and again, I'm not stating that the Bucks have all of these, all defense caliber players that they can throw out there in any given moment. But to me, to look back, I mean, we can do beginning of the season, but I think it especially stands out when you comp versus last year and look at what are the options the Bucks had versus where are they at now. And we saw a few chats about Pat Beverly, some interesting updates on that too, off the court for Pat Beverly and the Bucks. But that was basically it that you had last year. Okay, this is the guy that's basically going to have to take on the perimeter defense for us. And now this year, I mean, what I want to get to coming up next too is the tweaks that we've seen to the rotation for the Bucks. And it's something that you and I both kind of discussed and shared thoughts on. Hey, are we going to see a change to the starting lineup? We have, at least so far. I don't know how much of this relates to the personnel the Bucks are currently dealing with, but it's not what we expected. And it's one of those things, especially in that last win that the Bucks picked up against Miami, where you just look back and you say, can we try something else? And they could, like, time after time against Tyler Hero, the problems he was creating, and you're thinking we just need somebody to throw in there. And then they slowly settled into two options that really started to bottle him down. So it is certainly a much better spot for the Bucks to be in. I do want to touch on what we've seen for the rotation change and some of that size that you alluded to, and also what the Bucks have in front of them here, because this is it. This is that stretch that we've talked about for a long time earlier this season. these next 18 games that the Bucks have directly in front of them. We'll get into that conversation coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. This next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. The swoosh you save thanks to Dash Pass. Every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. When a player scores 50 or more in a game during the 2024-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order up to $10 off the next day from noon until midnight. Whether you're planning a game day feast, that epic 50-point performance can help you celebrate by ordering wings, pizza, or burgers from your favorite spot. Get them delivered directly to your door. Maybe you're craving something late at night as well. You just stayed up watching games and highlights or just need a midnight snack. You can use Dash Pass to grab something delicious while saving big, or you just need lunch on the go, a quick, easy meal for the next day. That's where Dash Pass gives you the assist on your favorite meal with $0 delivery fees, reduced service fees. Plus, now you can save even more with this exclusive NBA offer. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 savings. Just use the promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash.com to learn more. So the changes that we saw to the starting lineup, we both questioned whether or not Andre Jackson Jr. was long for the starting lineup in the second half of the season. And what we have seen so far is not only is that answer no, but he has essentially been removed from the rotation altogether. It is a conversation I've had many times with others on other shows as well, that look, I get Andre Jackson Jr. is just one of our guys for a lot of Bucks fans that you're invested in. You saw the defense, and again, it goes back to what we said at the start of the show. When you have to limit those types of players, he was one of the guys that stood out because he didn't fit that mold that the Bucks have. Well, now you've added more better perimeter defenders around him and solid team defenders, that the need for what he gives you isn't quite as important as where it was before, but it always boils down to the offense or Andre Jackson Jr. And I think it was a couple of things, partially as not really a slow realization of that, because he was always playing around 12 to 14 minutes a game, even when he started. But I think the fact that at the deadline, you added Kevin Porter Jr., who we've seen some nice things from, and Doc Rivers clearly likes what he brings. He's moved past Ryan Rollins in the rotation. You added Kyle Kuzma, who we've seen take on roles like a Tyler Hero in recent days at games as well. It has reduced the need for Andre Jackson Jr., and it's kind of expedited that conversation we were having of, yeah, but how does this work in the playoffs with that offense? And I've heard people point back and push back, I should say, with, well, the defense it's just that important. And I would argue it's not. You still have to score to win a game. And it's just, you're not going to get by playing 5-on-4 in the playoffs. And even maybe Andre Jackson Jr. will have a game where he goes 4 of 5 on corner threes. The opponent is still going to say, all right, do it 4 more times, do it 3 more times. Like, we're leaving you open every single time you're on the floor. And that's the challenge the Bucks were always going to be up against. So I don't mean this as a Andre Jackson Jr. is bad or a knock on him and let's move on from this. I think it's a good thing that the Bucks have said, we found other ways. We're still working. We're still developing him. Like, we still think there's something there, but in the interim, this is how we're going to move forward.
I love that Doc has seemingly just let guys play, talk for him. Like, if you are going to play at a higher level than someone else on this team, welcome to the rotation. And I don't think, as you said, that's a slight on Andre Jackson Jr. at all, because I think he does have some tools that could be really useful. We have to keep in mind, he's still a younger player in the league. We know that he has a gift athletically, that he's able to play some defense there, and the offensive part of his game needs to grow, because even when you look at the college tape, it wasn't as if he was somebody who was like a hub to himself offensively when it comes to scoring. He had a bit more playmaking juice than we've seen so far in the league, but we know that we knew when we drafted Andre Jackson Jr. that was going to be a bit of a challenge for him to kind of evolve offensively. And I think I said it before, I think this coming off season is going to be a really big one for Andre Jackson Jr. in the way that he's able to develop his game, because you can't have somebody that defenses are going to ignore on the court in the playoffs. It messes up all of your spacing, and it makes things more difficult for your team. And if the guy can hit those threes to keep the offense or the defense honest, they might still let him shoot it and still continue to shrink the floor regardless. Like we saw that years ago when the Bucks played the Celtics in the playoffs, and the guy that the Bucks gave that treatment to was Grant Williams, of like, if you want to shoot him, go ahead and shoot him. We are going to try to shut everything else down, but if you make him, go ahead. And he surely did that, much to the chagrin of Bucks fans everywhere of seeing Grant Williams go off that way. But it's like, how realistic is it for Andre Jackson Jr. to do that this year? But what I love about the roster additions is that you don't need him to do that in order to have a chance to be successful, because you have other options. And on top of that, you can still utilize him in matchups where things aren't working well, like against the Heat. You saw Andre out there because guys were in foul trouble and they were just having a tough time slowing him down in that first half. So he's nice to have right now as a change of pace guy, but he's somebody whose growth this summer I think is going to be really, really important for him going forward.
Yeah, I was mentioning it on the radio post-game show the other day too, that last point that you brought up, I think, is the important one, that, somebody had asked, well, how do you use him then? Like what's the plan, and what are the minutes for him? I think it's as simple as, I hate to say like the Thanasis treatment, but think back to some of those playoff runs where it was, we need a spark, we need energy, or this is a clear 40 seconds left on the clock, less than that, 22 seconds left on the clock. The opponent has the ball. We just need to stop here. Let's bring in Andre for this possession. That's the usage for this. And as you pointed to, the development going forward is the big piece for Andre Jackson Jr. But look, it's a good thing that the Bucks have more options to throw out there now. And again, it's tough to put into words just how much they have progressed on that end from where they were last year in the group that Doc Rivers inherited here. Real quick, though, we both kind of kicked around the names of a number of guys, and I think we pretty much aligned on, well, does it make sense for AJ Green to take the minutes in the starting lineup? And AJ's been going through a bit of a shooting funk of late. I still like Gary Trent Jr. coming off the bench and the spark that he gives you. And frankly, I would assume Gary Trent Jr. is going to close a lot of games for the Bucks in these types of settings, and potentially the playoffs as well. I did not foresee Doc Rivers just really leaning into the size and saying, Taurean Prince is going to be our starting two guard.
Me either. And I think you saw the challenges of going with that configuration against the Heat. I'm not sure about that starting lineup when you're dealing with smaller, more athletic guards that Taurean Prince is going to have to check, because he does struggle a little bit with that speed. Taurean Prince is somebody who you love the versatility of him being able to guard up a bit more than it is for him to guard down. So I think that there's still some tinkering to do with the starting lineup, but I do like the thought process behind it of like, we're just going to be a jumbo team. We're going to go big, but if your point of attack guy can't stop the opposing team, you're going to cause more problems than you are causing problems for the other team. Like you're giving yourself problems in that sense. So I think there is still some tweaking to be done. I don't think Taurean Prince is going to be that guy long-term for the starting lineup, although he's somebody who we have seen this season play better in the starting lineup next to Dame and Giannis. So how can you reconfigure that going forward just to make sure that you have a guy at that 2 spot who's a little bit more agile, able to stay in front of guys? And I think AJ Green makes a lot of sense. Even with him going through the shooting slump, other teams respect the shot. So they're going to defend him. They're not going to leave him open just because he's, been cold the last 5-6 games. They're going to still respect that. Plus, he gives you something on defense as well. I think it's something to consider.
Yeah, and I mean, tonight is potentially one of those too. With I don't think Fred VanVleet is going to play. He's missed a handful of games recently with an ankle sprain. Unfortunately, that means Amen Thompson has been moved into the starting lineup, but Jalen Green and potentially keeping an eye on that mismatch that could exist of Taurean Prince taking on that matchup. But, again, just the second half and the fourth quarter, especially against Miami, that was the biggest issue that the Bucks were up against. Dribble penetration. Tyler Hero was getting into the lane. The Heat were just pounding the Bucks in the paint in the first half, and Tyler Hero's got that really good deceleration floater. If it wasn't there, he could throw and set up lobs too. That was kind of creating all of the issues for the Bucks defense. And in the second half, I mentioned it too on a broadcast of, I wonder if we see Jalen Green, or not Jalen Green. If that'd be great if the Bucks had him. if we see Kevin Porter Jr. thrown out there on him to just try to slow him down, and that's what it was. He and Kyle Kuzma down the stretch to just throw some length on him, and try to slow them down and limit the dribble penetration. So that's one of the interesting things to keep an eye on in this game tonight is how do the Bucks defend that perimeter, assuming there's no Fred VanVleet for the Houston Rockets, because I mentioned that some things have changed. Not a whole lot has changed for Houston. We'll certainly take a look at that matchup. And we mentioned these next set of 18 games here for the Bucks, this next set of 18 games that they have, the 2 to wrap up the month of February, and then that March schedule. We'll take a closer look at that coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. So real quick on the Rockets, as we meant, they've been a fairly consistent team start to finish this season. It was way back in November that the Bucks and Rockets played, and that was the 101-100 win. Brook Lopez played 40 minutes in that game. And I mean, Frank and his household as the Rockets experts on this show would be better to ask this question too. I think the Rockets, oddly, are a pretty good matchup for Brook because of the way that Alperen Şengün plays. And I think Şengün played around the same amount of minutes in that game. But Brook was pretty good in that game. Not only the 40 minutes, 27 points and 4 blocked shots. And again, it just seems like what we've seen from Brook Lopez and his importance down the stretch for this team revolves around having more athleticism around him on both ends of the floor, where it's not just the defensive component where, hey, if guys are getting beat, Brook Lopez is constantly going to be under fire. Like, this allows you to funnel guys into Brook, but even more so if you're getting up and down the floor. I'm not going to say it doesn't make Brook Lopez getting down there offensively important, but it opens up much more trail threes, and it keeps a guy back there as well defensively to anchor things. So he's going to be interesting to watch here down the stretch for the Bucks.
He is, and the perimeter defender's ability to funnel guys properly to Brook Lopez makes a world of difference, which is part of why last season, when there was so much conversation around Brook Lopez's play, and like, oh, he's taking a step back, and it's like he's finding himself in a lot of 2-on-1 situations. He is trying his hardest, but he needs some help from the point of attack defenders as well, leading the opposing players properly to him so that he can make a play on the ball, make a play on the guy who's trying to get to the rim. So for Brook Lopez in this matchup against the Rockets, a Rockets team that we know very much likes Brook Lopez, a team that was very much interested in him as well, he's going to be really important. And his ability to trail the play and set up for those threes, because Brook Lopez is somebody who, I know some fans get irritated with the amount of threes that he launches or the quality of the threes that he launches. But when he's able to trail up behind the play, set up for one of those deep threes, and he gets his feet set and it's a late closeout, I feel good about Brook Lopez taking those shots. This is a Bucks team when it comes to shooting the 3 ball. Earlier in the season, we said we need to see them do it more because they were on pace to have some of the lowest 3-point shooting numbers in like the last 5-6 years. But they've turned that around, and it's good because it's a Bucks team that can knock them down at a pretty high clip. So you want to try to put guys in those positions, and Brook Lopez is one of them. And this matchup against the Rockets, Amen Thompson is somebody who I just enjoy watching. I've made the joke of like, that's a little bit of what I thought the ceiling for Andre Jackson Jr. could be, thinking about the defense and his ability to just move and create chaos on the court. And with the way that this Bucks offense I don't want to say they've been struggling. They've been picking it up a little bit, but we know we've had conversations about, hey, the Bucks offense has to continue to come along, this is going to be a really good test for him because this Houston team defensively is a beast. So it'll be really interesting to see how the Bucks offense can respond to the fast-paced pressure that the Rockets like to throw out there on them.
Bucks and Rockets nearly identical in their offensive efficiency, overall number, I should say. They do it differently. Houston, the number one team on the offensive glass this season. So that is certainly one of the bigger things to monitor is the job the Bucks do on the defensive glass. They've slid a little bit. They're down to 6th in defensive rebounding, but that may well determine who wins this game and dictate the outcome there, because when the Bucks close out possessions and limit those second chance opportunities, their defense has been very good, especially with the new additions in place. They run into trouble when those things start to extend, and we've still, you're going to need more of a sample size to get any type of gauge on this. We've still yet to see any movement for the Bucks on the offensive glass. They are number 30 in the league in their offensive rebounding rate. So as for the rest of this stretch leading into April, and that's the thing worth pointing out, is it does potentially calm down quite a bit once you get to April, because you have 2 games against the Pelicans, and I cannot stress enough, hey, it probably a good thing that this game got punted all the way to the end of the schedule, because New Orleans is going to have nothing to play for, and I would assume guys might be shut down by that point. You start the month of April with the Phoenix Suns at home in what's going to be a very interesting and probably emotional return for Mike Budenholzer there, but who knows where Phoenix is going to be by that point. Camille, you got the 76ers as your second game in April. They're done as we sit here now with a disastrous loss to the Bulls last night. I mean, it's over. I think they're already quiet quitting on the season. So it does start to calm down a bit, but the month of March is a much different story. So tonight in Houston, Thursday night at home against the Denver Nuggets in a very, very interesting matchup, as Denver's really started to turn the corner now of late, and they just did the Bucks a solid last night, beating the Indiana Pacers. But then you get into this stretch of more back-to-backs and just a lot of brutal games. Now, I think the difference is you got a lot of really tough games and a lot of games that you look at on the surface and say, okay, I know this team's above 500, but I don't think this is too terribly challenging for the Bucks. So case in point, you open up the month of March with a rather interesting schedule. So Saturday night, you're in Dallas against the Mavericks. Then you have 2 days off. Then you have a back-to-back in Atlanta on Tuesday, home against Dallas on Wednesday. Then you have 2 days off. That is your final stretch of 2 days off for the rest of the season. And it goes right into another back-to-back, 2 home games against the Magic and Cavs. That Magic game looked much more daunting a couple of weeks ago as the offense has really continued to fall off a cliff for Orlando. Cleveland's going to be a nice test for the Bucks, and they have 3 of those games remaining that, outside of the obvious games against the Pacers and potentially those final 2 against the Pistons, the 3 games most important and most worthy of keeping an eye on for the Bucks are all at home. March 9th, night 2 of a back-to-back against the Cleveland Cavaliers, your final matchup with them. 1 week later, March 16th, Stone Cold Steve Austin Day, another night 2 of a back-to-back at home against the Thunder. And then Friday, March 28th at home against the New York Knicks. Those 3 games, I know you beat the Thunder in the Cup final. You were destroyed by the Thunder in a game where no one played. But the Knicks and Cavs games especially, not only the growth that we've seen from the Bucks so far throughout the course of the season, but the personnel changes. And that Knicks game especially, the way that things have been trending for them, and some thoughts on how the Bucks can play them differently with these new groupings. Those are very important to keep an eye on to see how does this fit in the playoffs.
So what you're saying is that Knicks game is going to be the Jericho Sims revenge game, having that switchable big to throw out there, because that has given the Bucks a problem so far in this matchup with the ability that Karl-Anthony Towns has. But seriously, though, looking at the Bucks schedule and what they have in front of them, it is going to show us a lot about this team, because even those games that are against sub 500 opponents, those are teams that can give you a run for your money a bit, like the Magic, like the Hawks. Like those are teams that the record's not there, but you can't take a night off against them because they are going to be out there trying to compete. And the Magic in particular, again, the offense has been on the struggle bus, but we know what they can do defensively, and that's what they tend to hang their hat on. Like, can we get into a slugfest, make this ugly, and try to find a way to win? Can we limit what you're doing from three so that we can kind of catch up, because we don't like to shoot a lot of those anyways? But when you see what's in front of the Bucks, and given those games against the Cavaliers, another game against the Knicks, we've talked about how the Bucks have been unable to defeat those top teams in the East. And this is a month of March where you only get 2 of those games against the top in the East because you've already played all your games against the Celtics, but you're going to get a lot of competition from teams that are in the playoff chase. So you're going to be able to play against a lot of good teams down this stretch. And we've had questions about this Bucks team and how can they consistently compete against these teams. It'll be nice to see them try to get some wins there. And if they can, how does that change how you feel about the team going into the playoffs? So this stretch of March, we've called it out since the schedule was released. And now that we're actually here at this point in the season, it is still daunting. Maybe some of those games, not as much as we initially thought, but some other ones come along the way where you're like, okay, this is going to be a bit more challenging than we thought, like them ending the season with the road and home against Detroit. Like, this is going to be a really fun part of the schedule. And I think for people who really love basketball and just hoops and the competition aspect of it, it's a time to learn a lot more about this Bucks team. And I'm got some questions that I want to see answered, and this stretch should be really, really helpful in trying to figure some of that out. Like, I saw in the comments here as we record this live on our YouTube, some questions about what should Kevin Porter Jr.'s role be. And we've seen him be really effective in lineups where it's no Dame and no Giannis on the court, and them trusting in his ability to create his own shot, make plays for others to stand out. And I want to see if that can be something consistent for this team. Like, I don't think playoff time you want to try to steal any minutes with both of them off of the court, but understanding like what role can he really play for this team? Like, there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered. And they can really, really take some steps to separate themselves if they can compete against some of the top in the league.
I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because I'm sure we'll have a lot of thoughts on it as we get closer to that game. But that next game especially, that's what I'm very interested to see. And the irony there is, the reality is the Bucks are probably drawing, assuming you can get out of the first round, which, as we've learned the last 2 years, is a big if. The Bucks are going to draw the Cavs in the second round of the playoffs. I think it's I'm not going to say lock, but a pretty good chance the Bucks are staying on that 4-5 line.
Mm-hmm.
But I am curious to see that Knicks matchup, because what we have started to see more and more of is the Celtics have done this quite a bit, and frankly, they can do it as well as anybody outside of the Oklahoma City Thunder. We're going to put a smaller guy on Karl Anthony Towns, somebody that can hold up physically, but can switch off as well. So if you try to do a pick and roll between Towns and Jalen Brunson, great. We got a good defender switching on to Brunson. So it was Jason Tatum and Drew Holiday. Bucks, they didn't have a great game plan. I think it's fair to say that first time that they played the Knicks, they couldn't find anything that worked the second time. But we now live in a world where if you're the Bucks, you look at it and you say, okay, we'll put Kyle Kuzma on Karl Anthony Towns. We'll put Brook Lopez on Josh Hart. We'll put Giannis on OG Anunoby. If Taurean Prince is in the starting lineup yet, we'll put him on Mikal Bridges. And Dame gets Jalen Brunson. So, look, we got help for Dame. And if you try to get a pick and roll going here, fine. We got Kuzma switching on to Brunson. Like, we can play a lot differently, that it's not just targeting some of those mismatches. So I think it's important to see how the Bucks look in those games, especially because those are the types of teams you're going to have to play. And granted, good chance that you're not going to face the Knicks in the playoffs, but a good chance that those are the types of teams you're going to have to go through. 18 games between now and the end of March. It's split evenly for the rest of the schedule. The remaining, 26 games, I think it is, the Bucks have. 13 at home, 13 on the road. And this stretch, these next two and all of March, 9 at home, 9 on the road. So there's no split there either. What's the most important baseline number in those 18 games to say Bucks have to win X amount of these games?
Well, looking at that stretch, you mentioned it's an even split. But one part of that trip that they're going to have is another road trip where they're on the road for 5 straight games, where they're at Golden State, at the Lakers, at the Kings, at the Suns, at the Nuggets. Those are not teams you're going to see the Bucks play in the playoffs unless they get to the finals, and that's the opponent on the other end. But
Yep.
we have seen this team when it comes to some of those road trips and just disappointing West Coast trips for this Bucks team for a number of reasons. That's a stretch in particular for this Bucks team where I'm like, hey, if you guys can look strong there, because they've been a team that's been weaker on the road than they have been at home, more so than any other team in the top 6 in the East. So seeing them be able to compete on the road, especially as a team that's going to be kind of hovering on that 4-5 line, if you do end up being that 5 seed, I want to have a little bit more confidence too about your ability to compete on the road in those environments than if you had the home court. So that's one stretch I'm looking for. But as they go down the stretch here for these games, record-wise, like if they're a 500 record the rest of the way here, I'll be a little disappointed heading into the playoffs. Like I was hoping to see a little bit more, hoping to see them kind of gear up. It's no longer, a random Tuesday game in January where you're like, I just couldn't get up for this one. This is now we're pushing into the playoffs. So every game is that sprint towards the playoffs. We have to start playing some of our best basketball. So for a Bucks standpoint, like if you can go like 650 along the rest of the way here, that's a big, big win. And I will feel really good about this team heading into the playoffs.
So what is it, like 11-7?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I look at the schedule leading up to the West Coast road trip that you mentioned there, and it is 11 games that they have leading up to that 5-game West Coast trip. 7-4 is the goal of those 11 games. So tonight against Houston, Thursday at home against the Nuggets. You got 2 games against the Pacers, 1 at home, 1 on the road. 2 games against the Mavs, 1 at home, 1 on the road. But Dallas is going to be down basically every single big. Anthony Davis isn't being reevaluated until March 6th. Gafford isn't going to be back. Lively isn't going to be back. So you're going to have size advantages there. The Atlanta Hawks game on the road, it's a game you got to win. We've stressed the importance of these sub 500 teams. From here on out, you got to beat them. Same story with that Magic game. So in those 11 games leading up to the West Coast trip, 7-4 to me is the baseline of you got to do this, because you may well go off the rails like we've seen on the road overall and on West Coast trips these last 2 years. And similar to when Doc took over last year, what if you have a 1-4 5-game trip? It's not anything we're advocating for, but if that's the case, you're suddenly 8-8 then, where you're 500, and it puts a lot more importance on those final 2 games. So I think looking at everything leading up to that West Coast trip, 7-4 is the baseline of what you got to do. Hopefully you do a little bit better. And if you do that, I think you're in a really good spot. It's going to be, I've seen more and more chatter of catching the New York Knicks. You've gotten help in the last couple of days because of what the Knicks are doing, but you're still 4 games back in the loss column, and they have the tiebreaker. So you're going to have to outplay the Knicks by 5 games from here on out. And I just, barring some type of major injury, which I suppose you can never really rule out with the minutes that Tibbs places guys, I just don't see that happening. So leave your thoughts as well. Between now and the end of March, what's the record in those 18 games that you feel the Bucks absolutely have to achieve? And we'll start to address those coming up on the next few shows. But it should be a fun one tonight, and that's really the story for this next month of Bucks basketball, that you really got a lot of these types of games. So we'll see how things begin for the start of these final 18 games. That will do it for today's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.